Hello, and welcome to a new episode of Constructing Legends with the Violet Howler, a literary analysis of Voltron Legendary Defender. A common criticism I've seen people make about the show over the years is that the writers just didn't know what to do with Shiro. After his brief disappearance at the end of Season 2, the show stops touching on his past as a gladiator and the experiments that Zarkon's right-hand witch conducted on him during the year he spent as the Galra Empire's prisoner. And after spending so much of Season 2 fighting Zarkon for control of the Black Lion and finally obtaining the Black Bayard that was rightfully his, we never actually got to see him use it, even when he stepped back into the Black Lion's cockpit as a result of Keith's departure. Instead, the series focuses on the mystery of a secret project known as Operation Corone, which involves Shiro supposedly being captured off-screen at the end of Season 2 and being allowed to escape, then used by Haggar to spy on Team Voltron without his knowledge. Which ultimately culminated in the reveal that the Shiro who had returned in Season 3 was a clone, while the original Shiro had died at the end of Season 2. Then the two Shiros were merged together into a single body at the end of Season 6, and the showrunners revealed in a subsequent interview that Shiro was now one person with both sets of memories. In an August 2017 interview with Den of Geek right after Season 3 released, showrunner Joaquim dos Santos expressed that he and fellow showrunner Lauren Montgomery wanted Shiro to be gone for a much longer period and were not allowed to as a result of corporate meddling. And Dos Santos made sure to stress that they were happy with the direction that Shiro's story had gone in. But many fans who disliked the direction Shiro's plotlines went in latched onto that comment, and similar ones in later interviews, as proof that the writers never had a plan for Shiro to begin with. That the showrunners hadn't planned anything for after his death and made everything up as they went along when they were forced to bring him back. Leaving aside the fact that the 2017 interview implies that Shiro was always going to come back eventually and all that changed was when, even if the writers really didn't have a plan for him after Season 2, that doesn't mean they were incapable of coming up with one when the order came in. And when you look at the themes of Shiro's character arc and the parallels with other characters, it's incredibly clear that there actually was a plan. It's just not widely noticed by the general audience due to a combination of some of the arc's themes being conveyed through allegory, audience preconceptions, and the resolution being cut as a result of the executive meddling in Season 8 that I've talked about in prior videos. So for today's video, I'm going to lay out what Shiro's character arc was by discussing his canon character flaws, how those flaws factor into the themes of the show, how the clone plotline factors into those themes, and the parallels with other character journeys.
Defenders of the Universe, huh? That's got a nice ring to it.
When Allura is explaining the qualities that each lion represents in the 3-part pilot episode, she identifies Shiro as a candidate for pilot of the Black Lion,
who is a born leader, and in control at all times. Someone whose men will follow without hesitation.
While I've mainly seen fans focus on the first and third traits, the second one is most important to Shiro's journey over the course of the series. The core of his struggle with Zarkon for the title of True Black Paladin, and what ultimately allows him to break Zarkon's hold over the Black Lion, is learning that he has to be willing to surrender control and trust the lion as a partner instead of trying to command it like a servant. But we see elsewhere in the show that he has a hard time letting that control go in other areas of his life. Just as an example, he tends to overrule his teammates' decisions and concerns repeatedly throughout the first 5 seasons of the show.
It's worth the risk. Someone helped me escape. Ulaz freed me. Without him, we wouldn't be here.
You're going to have to lower your shield, shoot the cargo ship, and deal with the consequences.
But this isn't a request, Keith. Get to the FIM system. That's an order. Look, this isn't a vote. I'm the leader of Voltron. I'm making this decision.
Meanwhile, he consistently hides a lot of his worries and trauma from the rest of the team. In the Season 1 episode Crystal Venom, Shiro only starts to grow agitated and lash out at the captured Sendak once all the others have left, and one of the taunts that he hears Sendak say that gets under his skin is,
"The others don't know what you know. They haven't seen what you've seen."
And in the Season 6 episode Omega Shield, he repeatedly tells his teammates that he's fine when he's clearly in distress because of the psychic backlash from Haggar's visit to Orion.
Shiro, are you alright?
I'm fine. Come on, team. We've got to fix that shield as soon as... can't leave that planet unprotected.
As a result of this pattern, when he does try to open up to his team, they don't take his worries seriously or recognize his plea for help for what it is.
I'm feeling so confused. It's like...
What?
like I'm not myself.
It's probably just lack of oxygen. You should sit down.
In the first few seasons, the only person he allows to see past the mask of the strong, invincible leader who's always in control is Keith. When they're stranded together in the Season 2 episode Across the Universe, Shiro is frank with Keith about his condition and snarky about their situation in a way that he doesn't exhibit with any of the other Paladins up to that point. The same holds true in the Season 3 episode, Tailing a Comet, where Keith is all but stated to have been the only person Shiro interacted with while he was recovering from his journey back to the team in the previous episode. In their conversation, he's vulnerable and subdued, but when he goes on the bridge and Lance asks how he's feeling, he says he's feeling good, only mentioning a weird headache that he's trying to get rid of. And even in Season 4, Shiro tries to brush off the fact that the Black Lion doesn't respond to him anymore, and rejects Keith's efforts to encourage him to try and reconnect with it again. When you look at his behavior over the course of the series, it's clear that Shiro has a deep fear of letting others see him be vulnerable. And after we learn his backstory, we can see where that comes from. Flashbacks in Season 7, Episode 1, A Little Adventure, show us that despite his fame as the youngest pilot on a solo space mission in history, the leadership of the garrison doubted him because he had an unspecified illness that would one day prevent him from being able to fly. He was seen as a liability because his body was on a countdown. And in one way or another, almost everyone in his life, from his bosses to his romantic partner, was treating him like he was made of glass and telling him that he was too sick, too weak to pursue his dream. That he was defined by his illness. So it's understandable that he'd be so determined to prove all the naysayers wrong. But from the very first episodes, one of the most obvious themes of the show has been how people are stronger when they work together.
Heck, if you're gonna be this bad individually, you better at least be able to work as a team!
We are always stronger together.
So from a thematic perspective, stoically dealing with your problems in silence is against the show's intended messaging. And in general, Shiro's refusal to let himself be vulnerable brings to mind a lot of the stigma that still surrounds mental health issues today, particularly for men. Like the very damaging idea that someone who has mental health problems is somehow weak for needing help and not dealing with their issues on their own. Which means that the most logical endpoint for Shiro's character arc is for him to accept that he doesn't have to deal with his personal demons alone. That needing to seek help and rely on support from the people around you, or even to just admit your vulnerability, does not make you weak. And when you look at his arc from that perspective, the climax of the Operation Couronne storyline with Shiro attacking his team and subsequently fighting Keith can be seen as the embodiment of the consequences of not getting that support for your mental health. In fact, the whole idea of Shiro trapped inside the Black Lion, watching from the outside as another version of himself lives his life and spends time with his friends, can easily be read in this context as an allegory for dissociation. Which is a type of behavior sometimes exhibited by people dealing with trauma in which the person experiences a sense of detachment from reality. In the context of trauma responses, the behavior is sometimes associated with amnesia, which ties into Shiro not being able to recall most of the things he experienced as a prisoner of the Empire, and the gaps in Clone Shiro's memory between Seasons 2 and 3. But the original Shiro being stuck watching his clone's actions from inside the Black Lion brings to mind a specific form of dissociation known as depersonalization, which is described as feeling disconnected from one's body, like the things that are happening to you are happening to someone else while you're just observing from a distance on the other side of a metaphorical glass wall. So with all of this in mind, the fight between Shiro and Keith can be read as Shiro lashing out in the midst of a mental health crisis and trying to commit suicide by Paladin. Because when Hagar sends him to lead Keith away from her fleet, she tells him that Keith will be vulnerable to persuasion because of their connection. But when Keith arrives, Shiro makes no effort to persuade him of anything, and jumps right to trying to kill him. Yet unlike Shiro's silent and stoic demeanor when following Hagar's orders and fighting the Paladins, here he repeatedly taunts and antagonizes Keith with verbal jabs meant to get under his best friend's skin. as if he's deliberately trying to goad Keith into lashing out and killing him. But since Keith refuses to give up on him under any circumstances, even if it means dying alongside him, Shiro is able to calm down and become grounded again and start to heal. Never the same as he was before, but finally feeling like himself again. But even as he recovers from the whole experience, Shiro persists in treating the actions of his clone self as if they were a completely separate person, even though their characterization and personality were so identical that fans of the show spent nearly 10 months between the release of Season 3 and Season 6 convinced that all the clone theories were wrong and that the Shiro in Season 3 was still the original. In Season 6, Episode 6, All Good Things, Shiro refers to his clone as a thing and an imposter, then calls the clone version of himself evil in Season 7, Episode 6, despite him ostensibly having both sets of memories to know that that's not true. But with how much Shiro has focused on being in control, it's easy to understand why he would do that. Especially given the parallels that Season 6 gives him with another character who underwent a similar merging of two personas and then treated one version of themselves as a separate person.
The anger you feel toward me is to be expected. But understand that the events that transformed me into the witch Hagar also shrouded any glimmer of maternal instinct I may have had for my one and only child.
Like Shiro, Unnerva treats her actions as Hagar as if the things she did were done by a separate entity that was not her. Because after regaining all of her memories and realizing that Lotor is her son, she understandably doesn't want to face the reality that she neglected and abused her own child. So Shiro referring to his other self as evil does not reflect the writer's opinion on the issue, as I've seen some fans believe, but instead represents Shiro's own refusal to admit that he is capable of doing all the not-so-nice things his clone self did. His reluctance to face the reality that he became less patient with his team and less considerate of others. That he attacked and hurt them both verbally and physically. And this parallel is reinforced by the framing of Hagar's reclamation of her identity as Unnerva in the first episode of Season 6, and the merging of the two Shiros in the last episode of the season. Because both scenarios use the same visual of the character's eyes lighting up a solid color before the light contracts and then fades to reveal their pupils, a visual which is never used anywhere else in the show or by any other character. And much like how the Paladins don't dispute Shiro's claim that his other self was evil, Lotor also buys into the Hagar evil, Unnerva good perception from a different angle.
My mother ceased to exist when Unnerva drew her last breath. Do not believe for a moment that I would ever accept you as kin. You are an abomination, a twisted perversion of what was once so pure and beautiful.
However, in Season 8, Episode 8, Clear Day, the version of Lotor that appears during Allura's dream sequence calls out that way of thinking.
Hagar is no longer. She's Unnerva now.
True. Though I could rename this a Highlands puppy, you and I would still know what it truly is. The witch may change her name, but she will always be a witch.
So logically speaking, we should have gotten a scene at some point in the final two seasons where Shiro confronts the fact that as far as his memories are concerned, there is no difference between the original him and the clone. And I believe the fact that we didn't get such a scene, let alone one confirming the showrunner's comments about Shiro having both sets of memories, is a big part of why many fans didn't see the direction Shiro's arc was going in. The most acknowledgement the clone subplot even gets after the first episode of Season 7 is a flippant remark from Shiro about being a little out of sorts after having his consciousness transplanted into a new body. However, at Florida SuperCon 2018, less than 2 weeks after Season 7 released, Shiro's voice actor, Josh Keaton, said that the fight between Shiro and Keith in Season 6 was only the second most emotional Shiro scene he'd ever recorded, and that we hadn't seen the most emotional one yet. But the only emotional Shiro moment in the final season was when he said goodbye to Allura before her sacrifice in the finale, which, while sad, was too brief to match, let alone surpass, the emotional intensity of the Season 6 fight. Which all indicates to me that the scene Josh was referencing was cut as a consequence of the executive meddling in Season 8. Given how slow the pacing of the overall story arc is in the first half of the version of Season 8 we got, I feel that the scene most likely occurred after the events of Clear Day. And looking at the pacing and structure of events in the season we got, there are only 2 places in the final season where that moment could occur. The first would be that after the payoff to all the foreshadowing of Lotor being rescued from his mother, the cast would have gotten some time to catch their breath before they went off to confront Unnerva at the ruins of Planet Altea for the first phase of the final battle. But the other option is that, as I've mentioned repeatedly in previous videos, Allura was unconscious for 2 days after she absorbed the Rift creature in Clear Day. And with Unnerva on the loose, it wouldn't be realistic for our heroes to just sit doing and learning nothing for 2 days while waiting for Allura to wake up. And the hints at cut storylines even give us a perfect vehicle to force Shiro to have that conversation. Like I touched on in my episode on microcosm to macrocosm storytelling, the speech Warlord Lon makes at the end of Season 8, Episode 3 references a second time that he questioned the Paladin's intent when they came to his aid, which we did not see. Because that description does not apply to Lon's previous appearance in Season 6. And there are multiple details hinting that the creature the Paladins fought in Prisoner's Dilemma was meant to survive its supposed destruction in that episode and continue making its way toward Lon's base. Considering the fact that the creature demonstrates the ability to control other beings, and deliberately targets Keith after learning of his presence aboard its lair, I can think of no better way to spark a conversation about his and Shiro's fight than to turn the tables and reverse the roles. Forcing Shiro to confront his feelings about the fight in Season 6 that he's been avoiding by pushing him into a situation where he is now in the same position Keith was. But even with the proper resolution to Shiro's character arc stripped out by executive meddling, trace elements still made it through into Season 7. Because after the conclusion of the clone subplot, Shiro is more open and snarkier about his circumstances to the rest of the team in a way he never was before with anyone other than Keith.
After all you went through, how did you find the strength to be the leader of Voltron?
I had help. That's why there are 5 of you, to lift each other up. Well, I'm sorry, Lance, but I guess having my consciousness transplanted from the infinity of Voltron's inner quintessence into the dead body of an evil clone of myself has left me a little out of sorts for the past few weeks.
Oh, yeah.
And his final battle with Sendak in Season 7, Episode 12, Lion's Pride Part 1, serves as a reversal of their previous fight back in Season 1 in a way that reinforces the show's messages of overcoming obstacles together instead of struggling alone. Because in both fights, the two are evenly matched, and the victor is determined by who fights with support versus which one is fighting solo. In Season 1, Shiro chooses to battle Sendak all by himself, choosing to fight head-on rather than get the injured Lance to safety and engage in hit-and-run tactics from a position of strength. Meanwhile, Sendak showed up with a group of sentries and a trusted lieutenant to watch his back, who used the distraction of the fight to take Lance hostage, thereby distracting Shiro long enough for Sendak to get the upper hand and break the stalemate. But in Season 7, the situation is reversed. Because Sendak is now the one fighting alone after his victory or death approach to fighting the humans results in his entire fleet being wiped out and his command ship free-falling through the Earth's atmosphere. Meanwhile, Shiro has the Paladins and the entire Atlas crew ready to swoop in to help him escape at a moment's notice, with the Paladins even helping to adjust the angle of the ship's descent so that his duel with Sendak can even continue to happen in the first place. And when the ship finally crashes and Shiro gets knocked prone to the ground, Keith swoops in to deal the final blow against Sendak before he can finish Shiro off. But the other reason that I believe the fandom as a collective doesn't generally pick up on the purpose of the Operation Couronne subplot in regards to Shiro's arc is because of the genre expectations associated with the word clone. From the moment people figured out that the Couronne in Operation Couronne was the Japanese word for clone, fans were expecting the kind of clone story that's most common in sci-fi media, where the clone realizes the truth of their origins and develops their own identity independent from the person they were made from, and the two find a way to coexist. Like what Young Justice did with Red Arrow, or what Kingdom Hearts did with Roxas, Naminé, and Shio. As a result, a lot of analysis, fanart, and fanfic in the Voltron fandom from Season 3 onward has treated that version of Shiro as a separate character from the original, and perceived the merger as killing him off to make room for the so-called real Shiro. However, upon closer inspection of the series, the new Shiro being that kind of clone is not actually supported by the show's lore. For starters, the only people to use the word clone to refer to Shiro are people who did not have any information on how the other Shiro was made. None of the characters who were personally involved in the project ever used the word clone to refer to this duplicate Shiro at any point. In fact, Hagar herself treats the clone as if he's the same person as the original Shiro when she's telling him to lead Keith away in the Season 6 episode, The Black Paladins.
The Red Paladin's connection to you runs deep. Deeper than the others.
Furthermore, Hagar or the Galra being able to just download the original Shiro's memories and personality into clone Shiro's mind isn't something that the Galra Empire has been shown to be capable of. Pidge and Hunk might speculate in the Season 2 episode Shiro's Escape that the Empire implanted fake memories of escaping into Shiro's head via his prosthetic arm as part of an elaborate trap. But not only does the episode prove that Shiro's memories of the escape were real, the series never confirms whether what Pidge and Hunk are proposing is even within the Empire's capabilities. The Galra Empire's military and scientists are never shown doing anything tech-based with memory manipulation, or the kind of brainwashing that would be required to make Kuro, as the fans call him, think that he's the quote-unquote real Shiro. Alteans have been shown to be capable of downloading a person's memories to create a virtual avatar with the source's personality and knowledge, but the assumption that the Galra would have access to that technology due to the pre-war collaboration between their civilizations is never actually confirmed anywhere in the show or any other supplemental sources. Furthermore, obtaining Shiro's memories through technology would not explain how they would have access to any of his memories from after he escaped in the first episode. Which, in light of Hagar's involvement in the project, implies that Shiro's memories were acquired through mystical means. And Hagar has been shown to be capable of a lot of things when it comes to messing around with people's minds and memories magically. From reading memories and linking minds to spy through the eyes of others, to controlling other people's minds and moving a person's consciousness outside of their body, and so much more.
The Blue Lion has returned. And now I feel a resurgence of Altean energy.
Alfor's daughter lives. How?
I know not.
You don't stand a chance against Unnerva!
But if she had the ability to create a whole copy of a person's mind and personality independent of the original that could be implanted into a separate body, she would have just done that in Season 8 instead of having to look for alternate reality versions of Zarkon and Lotor. Especially because Season 8, Episode 10, Knights of Light Part 2, reveals that Hagar pulled Zarkon's spirit inside her own consciousness after his death, just like the Black Lion did with Shiro at the end of Season 2. Based on what we've been shown of Hagar's powers and the Galra Empire's technological capabilities, the only way it's possible for the clone to have all of Shiro's memories and personality is if he's literally the original Shiro's soul, or at least part of it, transplanted into a new body. Which is pretty much how her Robeasts were created in Seasons 1 and 2. Hagar transfers the pilot's quintessence from their original body into their larger robotic one. And her words to the gladiator Myzax in Season 1, Episode 2, Some Assembly Required, indicate that the Robeasts are all meant to remain aware of themselves in their larger forms and have all of their memories intact.
I think I have the opportunity you've been waiting for. How would you like to get your revenge against the champion?
Because why would Hagar bother asking if Myzax wanted revenge against Shiro if he wasn't even going to remember anything after she turned him into a Robeast? Which implies that all of the extra Shiro bodies that we saw at the cloning facility in the Black Paladins were basically the organic version of empty Robeast shells, lifeless and incapable of independent movement until Hagar does her ritual to transfer the pilot's quintessence into the new body. And she's previously demonstrated that distance is no obstacle for her abilities. Because not only is Hagar able to detect Allura's awakening from cryosleep when the princess is multiple galaxies away, but she's also able to pull Zarkon's consciousness into her own when she wasn't even in the same solar system when he died. So it's not out of the question for her to try and grab at least part of Shiro's soul at the end of Season 2 when he's right outside of Galra Central Command. In fact, it would even explain how she and the rest of her subordinates working on Operation Corone knew to stage the clone's escape when they did. Because unless she knew exactly where his soul was, how could she have known that Shiro was missing from Team Voltron instead of just recuperating in the castle, too injured to pilot his Lion? And it would certainly explain the lack of a body in the Black Lion's cockpit, given that the Season 8 episode Shadows demonstrated that she is fully capable of absorbing someone's essence without leaving a body behind. However, in All Good Things, Shiro tells Keith that his consciousness has been inside the Black Lion since the end of Season 2. Which presents a conundrum, since how could Hagar have yanked his spirit into a new body if it was already absorbed into the Black Lion? But given the sheer number of duplicate bodies that Season 6 reveals that Hagar had in storage, it's possible she didn't need Shiro's entire soul just to animate a single body. Which would reframe the merging of the two Shiros at the end of Season 6 as comparable to Steven and Pink Steven fusing back together after White Diamond removes Steven's gem in the finale of Steven Universe Season 5. Or that trope you see a lot in animated shows where a character gets duplicated into multiple copies that each embody different aspects of their personality that all merge back into the Prime version at the end of the episode. But even if you ignore how the clone storyline fits into Shiro's character arc, it's clear how much thought the writers put into his story when you look at the franchise's history and see how much the entire Operation Corone subplot takes inspiration from previous iterations of the brand. The plot points of Shiro being barred from piloting a Lion, mind-controlled into turning on his teammates, sabotaging the Castle of Lions, and Keith leading the charge to get him back are all pulled directly from the 2003 Voltron comics by Devil's Due Publishing. And on top of that, the way that Shiro's arc plays out over the course of Legendary Defender even functions as potential meta-commentary on the actual production of the original 80s cartoon. Because while many fans incorrectly believe that Voltron was just an American dub of the anime Beast King Go Lion, what the original Voltron writers actually did was repurpose Go Lion's footage to tell their own story that put their own spin on the same core concepts. In Go Lion, the black armored pilot Takashi Shirogane was the mentor of the group, particularly to the red armored team leader who flies the Black Lion, and was a typical example of the mentor who dies early to motivate the heroes by forcing them to face the villains on their own. Then later in Go Lion, the audience meets Takashi's identical brother Ryo Shirogane, who had been captured by the Galra off-screen and had already escaped at the time of his introduction. After his escape, Ryo became a major leader in the rebellion against the Galra King Daibazal, before ultimately sacrificing himself to take down Prince Syncline in the finale. When the footage from Go Lion was adapted into Voltron, character deaths and violence had to be removed or toned down in order to comply with the standards of what American media considered acceptable content for kids' shows. As a result, Takashi and Ryo's deaths were omitted from the story entirely. And since they were already identical, the production staff on Defender of the Universe chose to simplify the number of characters to keep track of by combining the two Shiroganes into a single character with one continuous story arc, giving us the character of Sven, who, instead of dying, was sent away to recover at a space hospital, while Ryo's scenes are used to create a subplot where he gets captured off-screen and forms a team of rebel guerrilla fighters alongside Rommel. In Voltron Legendary Defender, Takashi Shirogane is introduced as the oldest and most experienced of the Lion pilots, having already graduated from the Galaxy Garrison's Academy, and is established as a born leader with a close relationship to the red armored Lion pilot. After being injured in a fight against Hagar at the end of the first season, Shiro starts preparing Keith to be his successor as the leader of Team Voltron and pilot of the Black Lion. Which, in light of his backstory flashbacks from Season 7, which were originally planned to be in Season 2, can be seen as Shiro intentionally casting himself as the doomed mentor archetype of the group. A role which is seemingly confirmed when he vanishes into thin air at the end of the second season. He comes back just 5 episodes later, seemingly only slightly worse for wear on the physical side, but with the implication that there's something off, and that this version of Shiro might not be the same one that audiences just lost. Then in Season 6, not only do we get confirmation that the Shiro we've been following since Season 3 is a clone, but after the clone is rendered barely living, the original Shiro's consciousness is transferred into his body by Allura. And since he has both sets of memories, he's now effectively both versions of himself at once. And he then goes on to become a key leader of the Rebel Coalition in the final seasons as captain of the IGF Atlas. When you look at the history of the Voltron franchise, what happens to Shiro in Legendary Defender is a literal representation of what the production staff of the original 80s show did with the characters he was based on. Combine multiple characters and storylines into a single arc with just one set of footage. So contrary to what many fans believe, the writers absolutely knew what they were doing with Shiro's arc, and the fact that the build-up was left hanging without proper resolution doesn't mean that there was never a plan to begin with. And despite some complaints I've seen over the years that his past in the arena and why Haggar was so invested in him was never explained, the show actually does give us those answers within the first 3 seasons. It's just not immediately obvious because the clues are sprinkled throughout the show for us to figure out ourselves, instead of being spelled out with a clear, direct explanation in a focus episode like we got with the mystery of how he escaped. When the prisoners aboard Sendak's ship in the 3-part pilot episode see Shiro, the only one with actual lines displays not only trust that Shiro isn't there to hurt them, but confidence that he will save them from prison.
It's you. It's you, the champion. If anyone can get us out of here, he can.
And one of Shiro's comments to Allura during their infiltration of the Quintessence refinery later in the season indicate that he was able to escape on his own at least once before Ulaz broke him out.
Shiro, are you alright?
I just remembered how I escaped from the Galra prison ship.
Combined with how he had a flashback in Some Assembly Required to sentries charging at him, which was clearly a different scenario than the circumstances of how he actually escaped as we saw in Season 2, it all suggests that the other prisoners called Shiro champion not simply because he was a peerless gladiator, but because he helped others escape from Zarkon's own flagship. And those breakouts would have had to have succeeded for the prisoners we see in Season 1 to be that confident in his ability to get them off of Sendak's ship in the pilot. Meanwhile, the clues to why Haggar was so invested in Shiro that she made so many copies of him are sprinkled throughout the entire show. When we learn about her first Robeast that she created from the gladiator Myzax, she says,
"I have been working on perfecting something,"
which indicates that she's been developing Robeasts for a while before Voltron emerged. And later in the season, she says that the Komar is finally ready for testing after many years, indicating that she's been working on both projects for some time before the series began. Then in Season 8, the Altean mechs, which each have a Komar mounted on them to drain quintessence from the pilot's surroundings, and which are explicitly said to use their own pilot as a power source, are also referred to as Robeasts.
That's the 3rd star system we checked in the last 11 days, and we still haven't found a single clue about any Robeasts.
Well, the Atlas is headed to the Grey Eye system, where we've identified the remains of a disabled Robeast.
Which implies that the Altean mechs that we see in Season 8 are the final iteration of both projects. And from a logistics perspective, that makes sense. Because Haggar's prototype Komar was anchored on Zarkon's flagship, which is big, slow, and could only drain one planet at a time. By mounting the Komar on a faster vehicle, like for instance a giant mecha, Haggar can dispatch multiple Komars across the universe at once so that the Empire can drain multiple planets at the same time. And that's not the kind of responsibility that she or Zarkon would want to put in the hands of a potentially uncontrollable commander who might turn against them if given access to that much power unchecked. But it's also a task that requires a skilled pilot with the ability to think somewhat independently, rather than a reprogrammed sentry that can be easily outthought. So given the level of control she displayed over Clone Shiro in Season 6, all these clues are pointing toward Haggar having selected Shiro as the ideal pilot for the final Robeast model because of both his skill in the arena and the fact that he was one of the garrison's best pilots. As for how that would make him the Empire's greatest weapon, as Haggar calls him, Koran mentions in Season 3, Episode 7, The Legend Begins, that Zarkon, and by extension Haggar, wanted Voltron because they had been trying to get back into the Quintessence field since the war began. At no point in the show has Voltron ever been depicted as creating brand new rifts on its own, only closing or reopening ones that were already there. Meanwhile, the lack of security around Lotor's Riftgate implies that its parents didn't know that the original rift still existed, which means that based on the level of knowledge that Zarkon and Hagar are presumed to have, they would have needed to figure out how to make a new rift on top of finding the Voltron lions. And Season 8 shows us that it took the combined quintessence of 4 entire planets, amplified by the giant Olkari Echo Cubes, and the quintessence of Orion's White Lion Guardian, just to tear open a temporary window into the quintessence field long enough to pull out Lotor and Syncline. Just think of how much more it would take to create a stable rift that would stay open indefinitely. So if Hagar was working on accomplishing the goal of creating a new rift for years while her husband searched for Voltron, it's no wonder she took Shiro escaping and fighting against the Empire as a paladin so personally. I can understand people wanting certain elements of a character's arc to get more focus or to be conveyed in a more overt manner. But Voltron was trying to tell a very specific story with Shiro, and it's unfair to claim that the writers had no plan just because the one they did have wasn't immediately obvious and didn't go in the direction people wanted. Because when you look at all we know about Shiro's character flaws, the show's world building, and his parallels with Hagar, it's clear that the writers absolutely knew what they were doing with him, even when they had to tweak aspects of the execution as they went along. Thank you all so much for watching. If you have any thoughts, observations, or counter-arguments regarding anything I've said here in today's video, feel free to share in the comments below. And if you'd like to be notified whenever I post new videos, be sure to click subscribe, and I'll see you all back here again on January 31st for my next video.